I'm 66 years old, and this what I'm typing right now on a cheap second-hand laptop is the first true confession I've ever made in my entire life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anyone to believe me either. For 4 generations, my family protected a secret so old and so dark that even now, decades later, I feel sick putting it into words. But time has a way of catching up, outliving you, circling you, dragging you back to the things you tried to outrun. And lately, I've felt something watching me again. Something that remembers my blood. So here I am. First time on the internet except for the library computers I used to check weather alerts. First time writing more than a grocery list. First time admitting the truth about Blackwater Pines. That's where I grew up. Deep in the Montana mountains, where the pines grow older than graves, and the fog sinks low enough to swallow whole valleys. There was no road sign, no property marker, nothing but a winding dirt trail, and a cabin that had existed longer than any map. It was our home, a small, creaking wooden structure with a tin roof and a porch that sagged under every snowfall. My mother kept it spotless despite how old it was. She was a gentle woman, soft-spoken, with warm hazel eyes and hands that always smelled faintly of pine resin and bread dough. She hummed when she worked, Bible verses or folk songs. She said she learned from her grandmother. But the thing I remember most about her was the way she treated every scrap of food, every strip of cloth, every bone and feather, and pelt with an almost sacred reverence. Nothing wasted. Nothing lost, she'd say, turning leftover stew into tomorrow's breakfast, drying fruit peels into teas, stitching old shirts into quilts. It wasn't just thriftiness, it was ritual. I see that now. My father is harder to talk about. We didn't see him often. Not really. There were nights when we'd hear him heavy steps on the porch long after midnight, the groan of the basement door opening, the distant, muffled murmurs of my parents speaking in low voices. Sometimes an odd rhythm would drift up from below, like something thudding softly against the floor. But he rarely appeared during the day. When he did, it was always just the outline of him, crossing the yard toward the woods or carrying a bundle of furs into the shed. I don't think I ever saw his face clearly until the night everything ended. Back then, though, I didn't question it. Kids don't question the world they're born into. They don't realize how strange things are until they leave. Our cabin had 4 rooms upstairs: Mother's room, my siblings' shared room, and the hallway closet. But there was a 5th room too. A door thicker than the others, painted the color of ash, with a long iron bolt across the front. We called it the old pantry, though none of us had ever seen the inside. We weren't allowed to. Mother's voice was always gentle, but when it came to that room, something cold crept into it. "Don't touch that door," she'd warn. "Don't lean on it. Don't listen at it. Don't ever go inside." My brother Will, always the bold one, once asked her why. Mother froze mid-stir over the soup pot. I remember her knuckles whitening around the wooden spoon. "Because your father uses that room," she said, and that was the end of it. It didn't matter how much Will pressed, or how much little June cried to know. More, the old pantry remained a forbidden piece of our home, a silent boundary none of us dared cross. But it wasn't the only strange thing about life in Blackwater Pines. Our cabin sat near a slope, where the woods were known for stories, old tales of hunters who vanished without a trace, of wolves walking upright, of drumbeats echoing across the tree lines. Sometimes, when dusk settled and the wind died down, we'd hear distant howls that didn't belong to coyotes or mountain lions. Low, rolling calls that made the trees seem to lean in and listen. The loggers in the nearest town, 20 miles of winding forest trails away, called Blackwater Pines a cursed forest. They joked about things with glowing eyes or tracks too big to belong to anything natural. They'd tap their beer glasses and laugh, but none of them hunted near our land. No one did. But Mother, she would shake her head when Will or June whispered about the stories. She'd stroke their hair, calming them as if shooing away bad dreams. The woods protect us, if we follow the rules, she'd say. There were always rules with her. Rules about the forest, rules about the night, rules about what we could ask, and what we must never ask. As a child, those words comforted me. Blackwater Pines wasn't frightening when my mother said it was protecting us. The vastness of the woods became something benevolent instead of threatening, something ancient and watchful rather than cruel. But as I look back now, I see her words differently. Not the woods protect us, but the woods contain us. If we follow the rules, if we stay obedient, if we pretend not to hear the sounds beneath the floorboards, if we ignore the wet, heavy dragging noises Father made when he returned before dawn. I remember the nights most of all. Nights when the cabin felt too small. Nights when the forest pressed against the windows so thickly, it looked like the trees were leaning in to eavesdrop. Sometimes, the moon would rise red and fat over the ridge, smearing the treetops in a copper glow. Those were the nights when Will whispered to me that he saw huge shadows moving between the pines. When June cried because the wind carried a voice that almost sounded like Father calling her name. Mother never let us look outside on those nights. She'd shut the curtains, bolt the doors, and make us all sleep close together near the fire. Her body felt so small between us, shaking not with fear, but something closer to sorrow. Those were also the nights when the cabin floor thumped softly, as if something walked beneath it. I didn't understand back then. But a child senses things adults try to hide. I sensed that whatever my father was, it wasn't just a man. And whatever my mother feared, it wasn't the forest. It was us, her own children. I didn't know it then, but she was praying we'd never become like him. We didn't have many possessions growing up in Blackwater Pines, but we had rules, 7 of them spoken with the same quiet seriousness as prayers. Mother never yelled, never threatened. She simply repeated them at the breakfast table, at the hearth, beside our beds, until they became part of the air we breathed. The rules were simple, but absolute. 1. Don't go into the woods after sunset. 2. Don't open the north door. 3. Don't go near the old pantry. 4. Don't ask about your father. 5. Never waste meat. 6. Never travel to town. 7. And if the drums start, stay in bed. Do not look outside. She said them gently, but her eyes always hardened at the last rule. I didn't understand why then. I wasn't supposed to. Children don't notice fear unless it slips into a parent's voice, and Mother kept her fear sealed tight. Our childhood was isolated but strangely abundant. We were poor by every conventional measure, yet we never lacked meat. Deer, elk, wild boar, even cuts so large and strange that they didn't match anything I'd ever seen in a picture book. Sometimes Father returned with something so heavy it shook the porch when Mother dragged it inside. Other times it arrived already butchered, laid out neatly on the kitchen table before dawn. She never explained where it came from, only pressed a finger to her lips and repeated our family mantra, nothing wasted, nothing lost. Will loved that rule. He was built for the woods, tall, strong, broad-shouldered, like the mountains themselves had shaped him. June wasn't far behind him. Even as children, the two of them moved through the forest with an ease that frightened me sometimes. They could climb the rock ridge behind the house in half the time it took me, and they could carry carcasses I struggled even to drag. I was different. Smaller, slower, more attached to books than to axes. I spent my evenings by the fire, turning pages, while the twins sprinted through the trees barefoot, laughing like the cold didn't touch them at all. Still, no matter how bold they grew, none of us ever broke the rules. Especially not the ones tied to the cabin itself. The north door was always locked. Always. Its wood had swollen with age, and the hinges were rusted green, as if the forest itself was trying to seal it shut. Mother kept the key in her apron pocket, and would flinch every time one of us walked near it. Whatever was behind that door, whatever lay down the slope it faced, wasn't meant for our eyes. The old pantry was worse. A windowless room at the back of the cabin, so old that the boards had blackened with time, its handle wrapped in leather cord. That door was never touched. Not once in my entire childhood did I hear it creak open unless Father had returned. We'd hear the bolt slide back, the hinges groan, and then the wood would fall silent again. Mother never warned us with anger, only with dread. "Don't open it," she'd whisper, "not even a peek." But it was the seventh rule that lived in my bones more than any other. The one she recited with a tremor she tried to hide. "If the drums start, stay in bed. Do not look outside." Drums. As a boy, I tried to imagine what she meant. Thunder, wind, hunters. Stories whispered through Blackwater Pines had always carried tales of missing loggers, strange footprints, nights when even the wolves hid. Folks spoke of those woods, the way sailors spoke of the sea, with respect, with fear, with the understanding that the forest had its own laws. Mother always insisted the woods protected us as long as we followed the rules. Some nights, lying awake, I'd hear faint thuds in the distance. Slow, rhythmic. But I told myself it was my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I told myself it was snow falling off branches, or trees bending in the wind. Children invent explanations, because the alternative is too frightening to consider. But the older I got, the harder it became to ignore the strangeness around us, the meat arriving without fail, the heavy steps outside long after midnight, the soft crying that sometimes drifted from the old pantry walls. The north door, always locked, always cold, even in summer. And Father always absent, always unseen except in shadow. A giant silhouette passing by the window before dawn. A deep voice murmuring beneath the floorboards. A shape in the tree line that vanished when the sun touched it. I began to ask questions. I couldn't help myself. Children grow, and with growing comes curiosity. Where does Father hunt? Why can't we open the north door? Why does the meat look strange? Why can't we go to town like other families? Mother would press her lips tight and busy her hands. Sometimes she'd pull me close, smoothing my hair as if I were still a toddler frightened of thunder. "Your father provides for us," she would say softly, "in ways you can't understand yet." Those words stayed with me long after I fell asleep. They warmed me, comforted me until they didn't. Until I was old enough to realize she wasn't just explaining. She was warning. Winter came early that year in Blackwater Pines, sharp, heavy, the kind that muffles every sound except the ones you're not supposed to hear. The night it happened, the moon was buried behind thick clouds, and the forest outside our thin cabin walls felt wider and darker than ever. I woke to a sound so deep it rattled my bones before it reached my ears. A single drum beat low, heavy, like someone pounding on a hollow tree the size of a house. Then another. And another. Slow. Rhythmic. Each one spaced just far enough apart to make my chest tighten. The cabin shivered with every strike. I lay frozen under my quilt, breath held, afraid to even blink. The wind wasn't blowing. The snow outside had stopped hours ago. Yet something vast, something patient, was beating a rhythm through the forest floor itself. Stay in bed. Do not look outside. Mother's voice echoed through my head, but fear does strange things to a child's curiosity. I slid from the mattress and crept to the window, each thud of the drums shaking the glass slightly. The cold bit into me as I lifted the corner of the curtain with trembling fingers. In the dark distance between the tree trunks, I saw a silhouette moving toward the woods. Father. At least, that was the name we used for him. But this figure, it was too large. Too misshapen. Shoulders hunched forward, head low, arms long enough to brush the snowdrifts as it walked. The moon peeked through just long enough to illuminate the frost, clinging to a coat of coarse, dark hair. No human walked like that. My stomach turned as I watched him cross the yard, each step heavy enough to leave deep prints even from my window. He didn't take a lantern, didn't take a coat, didn't take weapons. And yet he walked toward the drums as if responding to a familiar call. I let the curtain fall shut and backed away from the window, heart pounding in time with the trembling floorboards. The next morning, the drums had stopped. The woods were silent again, the kind of silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Around noon, someone knocked on the cabin door. 3 sharp raps that made Mother go still as stone. A man stood outside, bundled in hunting gear, face raw from the cold. Snow clung to his beard and lashes. He looked relieved when he saw Mother. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you. I'm looking for my partner Ely Harper. He came hunting up this way 2 days ago. Haven't heard from him since." Mother didn't open the door fully. She kept her body angled, blocking his view inside the cabin. "No hunters come through here," she said, voice tight. "You've got the wrong valley." "I don't think I do, ma'am," he said, peering past her shoulder. "I found tracks near your ridge. Boot prints. And other prints." Mother's jaw clenched. "You need to leave." He blinked, taken aback. "I'm not accusing nobody, ma'am. I'm just looking for him. He's got a wife. A daughter." Mother's voice softened just a little. "And they deserve peace. You won't find him here. Go home before dark." The man hesitated, glancing toward the tree line toward the same direction where Father had disappeared the night before. "All right," he finally muttered. "But if you see anything, you send word." Mother shut the door before he finished speaking. I didn't see anger on her face. I saw fear. 2 days later, meat filled the cabin again. Father hadn't been seen since the drums, but the kitchen table was suddenly stacked with cuts, huge ones more than Will or June could carry even together. Some of it looked like elk. Some of it looked like wild hog. Some of it. I tried not to stare at the shapes wrapped in butcher cloth. Mother worked fast, dividing it for salting, smoking, freezing. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. That afternoon, Will came running from the woods, breathless, eyes wide. "You need to see this." June and I followed him past the ridge. Snow had been disturbed in a long, winding trail. Dark stains splashed across the drifts, too much blood for an animal, and spread too far. And there were tracks. Large ones. Larger than any boot. Larger than any bear. Each print was deep, almost clawed, spaced far apart like something with a massive stride had passed through in a hurry. June swallowed hard. "Do you think it's wolves? A cougar? No, Will whispered. No animal walks upright. We looked at one another, the cold sinking deeper than the winter air. The truth was simple but monstrous. Something in those woods was hunting. Something big. Something powerful. Something that left blood and silence behind it. And whatever it was, it lived with us. Inside our home. Behind the old pantry door. After the blood in the snow and the hunter's questions faded into uneasy silence, winter settled deeper over Blackwater Pines, and Mother began to fade with it. At first it was only small things. She rose later each morning, moved slower in the kitchen, leaned heavier on the table when she taught us how to trim a flank or salt down a haunch. But just like the first crack in ice before a lake breaks open, the signs grew quickly, spreading across her like frost. Even weak, she forced herself to teach us. She'd sit wrapped in quilts by the stove, correcting my grip on the knife, guiding June's hands as she tied sausage casings, nodding approvingly as Will carried in another stack of firewood with one hand. Respect the meat, she whispered through trembling breaths. Respect the life, nothing wasted. Nothing lost. She repeated it even when her voice collapsed into coughs. Will absorbed those lessons in ways that frightened me. He no longer walked, he stalked. He spent whole days in the woods, coming home with pine needles tangled in his hair, the smell of moss and blood on his clothes. His strength surged into something unnatural. Sometimes I'd wake at night and hear him outside, splitting logs in the dark, as if something inside him wouldn't let him rest. June changed too. The little sister who used to sing hymns with Mother now wandered the porch at midnight, barefoot in the snow, lifting her face to the tree line and letting out a long, eerie hum. Not a tune, not crying. A note deep, shaking. Strange that drifted into the woods, like she was calling to something that already knew her name. Some nights, something answered. I could tell myself lies about Will and June. I could pretend they were just growing up differently than me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever was happening to them wasn't human. And I was the odd one out. The emotional one. The careful one. The one who still prayed before bed, who still feared the north door, who still flinched at the thought of Father crossing the yard in the dark. I felt guilt, dread, the sickening sense that I was standing on the wrong side of something ancient and hungry. Then the storm came. It rolled in without warning, a wall of wind and sleet slamming against the cabin, so violently that the windows bowed in their frames. The fire snapped low, struggling to stay alive under the draft. Will had just come in from the woods, soaked and shaking off snow, when June screamed from the hearth. Mother had collapsed, slumped sideways in her chair, eyes half open but unfocused. Her breath was thin, rasping like it was leaking out of her rather than drawn in. I grabbed her shoulders, shaking gently. Mom, please look at me. Nothing. June covered her mouth, trembling. We need Father, Will muttered, voice low, almost growled. He'll know what to do. The storm howled louder, drowning his words, but I understood. Father, whatever he was, had always been the backbone of this strange life. The hunter. The provider. The thing Mother trusted when all else failed. But he wasn't here. We searched anyway. Will tore through the woodshed. June ran to the tree line, shouting into the storm, her voice swallowed by thunder. I circled the cabin, calling into the wind until my throat burned. Then Will stopped dead. Look, he whispered, pointing to the mud. There, cutting straight through the slush, was a trail something massive dragged through the yard, plowing aside snow and dirt in a long, uneven groove. Not footprints. Not boot tracks. A hall mark, heavy and fresh, leading directly toward the back of the cabin. Toward the old pantry. My heart lurched. The pantry had been sealed my entire life, its handle tied with leather cords so old they were black with age. But now, the cords hung loose, swinging in the wind. The door was cracked open. Only an inch, just enough to show darkness beyond it. But it was open. Will stepped forward without hesitation, muscles coiled tight, like he was ready to face whatever waited inside. June grabbed his arm. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. I did. A metallic stench rolled out from the gap, thick and suffocating. The smell of blood. Old, cold, heavy blood. The smell of iron pots left outside in rain. The smell of something that belonged deep under the earth, not behind the walls of our home. Lightning flashed, lighting the yard white for an instant, and the door creaked a little wider under the wind's push. I leaned closer despite everything in me, screaming not to. Inside, in the second of bright light, the storm granted me. I saw it, a hook hanging from the ceiling, thick chain leading down to something pale and wet, swinging gently back and forth. Stains darkened the floor, old stains sunk deep into the wood. Shapes I couldn't name lay piled in the far corner. And farthest back, behind all of it, something shifted, a slow, heavy exhale that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. The door slammed shut under a rush of wind, plunging everything back into dark. My breath trembled out of me. For the first time in my life, I understood the old pantry wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous. It was forbidden because it was alive. Mother died just past midnight. One moment her breath trembled like a candle about to go out, and the next it slipped away entirely silent, small, final. The storm had quieted by then, leaving a heavy stillness in the cabin, a kind of hush that felt wrong for a moment so enormous. June let out a choked sob. Will clenched his jaw so tight I heard something crack. I knelt beside Mother's chair, holding her hand long after it went cold. And then the forest answered. A drumbeat louder than anything I'd ever heard boomed through the valley. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. The walls of the cabin shook. Dust sifted down from the rafters. The windows trembled in their frames. The rhythm was slower this time, but deeper, ancient, a pulse older than language. Will straightened immediately, as if the sound pulled a string inside him. June's eyes rolled back slightly, pupils blown wide, and she whispered, "He's coming." The front door creaked. A shadow filled the doorway long before the figure stepped inside. When he finally crossed the threshold, the lantern flame flickered violently, as though the air itself recoiled. Father. But not the shape I'd glimpsed in moonlight. Not the silhouette slipping through the trees. This time I saw him clearly. 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Shoulders broad enough to block the doorway. Fur matted and dark, glistening with melted snow. Arms long, impossibly long, ending in hands that weren't quite paws, weren't quite human. His spine curved like an animal, forced into the shape of a man, and his face, God help me, his face was a broken mask of beast and something that used to be human. A snout where there should have been a nose. Teeth jagged and uneven. Eyes burning a sick, feral yellow in the lantern light. And yet he looked at Mother first. He lowered his massive head and sniffed the air around her still body, a rumbling sound deep in his chest, like grief filtered through an animal's throat. Then, with surprising gentleness, he scooped her into his arms, her entire weight, no more than a scarf across his chest. He turned to us. Follow. The word wasn't spoken like a man speaks. It vibrated through the walls, through the floor, straight into my bones. Will didn't hesitate. June walked forward like she was sleepwalking, eyes glazed, mouth parted in awe. I should have run. Every instinct in me screamed to flee into the blizzard, to vanish, to never look back at this thing we'd called father. But mother lay in his arms, and my brother and sister were already stepping into the night. And the drumbeat grew louder, echoing through the trees, like the heartbeat of some colossal beast waiting for us. I followed. He led us not into the storm, but around the cabin toward the door I feared more than anything. The old pantry. The leather cord I'd seen hanging loose earlier now lay discarded in the mud. Father pushed the door open with one massive hand, and a wave of metallic air washed over us, blood, rust, earth, something older than rot, older than man. Will stepped inside without hesitation. June followed, her fingertips trailing along the walls, like she was touching something sacred. I forced myself in after them. The darkness inside didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, thick, breathing. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing shapes that made my stomach clench. Bones. So many bones. Not thrown in piles, but organized, stacked by size, by shape. Ribs bundled with twine. Skulls meticulously cleaned and arranged on shelves like a grotesque library. Pelts of animals, bear, elk, wolf. Things I couldn't recognize hung like tapestries along the walls. Masks carved from human skulls stared down at us, hollow-eyed, polished to bone-white sheen. At the far corner, a stone altar had been carved directly into the foundation, slick with years of use. Symbols older than English wound across it. Spirals, crossed lines, jagged shapes that seemed to twist when you blinked. And at the center of the room, etched into the ground itself, was a circle of stones arranged in 3 rings. Each stone was carved with the same ancient sigil, a wide open jaw, fangs bared, swallowing a smaller shape. The devouring rite. I didn't know the name then, not consciously, but some part of me recognized it. Some old instinct buried in my blood whispered it. Will and June knelt at the circle's edge without being told. Father laid mother's body in the center, her pale skin glowing faintly in the lantern's dim light. The drums grew louder. I pressed my back to the wall, breathing shallow, watching as the creature that was my father knelt beside her, placing one massive palm over her heart. Will whispered, "It's starting." June's lips curled into a strange, reverent smile. The devouring rite. A ceremony older than our family. Older than the mountains. Older than the concept of mercy. I finally understood what mother had been protecting me from all these years. Not the pantry. Not the drums. Not even father. She had been protecting me from the truth. That our family didn't just follow a tradition. We were born from it. Father lowered mother onto the stone altar with a tenderness that did not belong to something shaped like a beast. The drums outside grew heavier, closer, as if the forest itself was enclosing around the cabin. The lantern flame flickered wildly, shadows stretching and bending across the pantry walls like living things. He reached into a wooden bowl carved from some ancient knot of pine and took out a dark resin. Pine pitch thick, black, and gleaming like oil. With one massive thumb, he smeared it across mother's forehead, her chest, the palms of her hands. The scent rose immediately, sharp, sweet, earthy, almost holy. Then he lit it. A blue flame sparked to life over her skin, not burning, but glowing, pulsing to the rhythm of the drums. The whole room inhaled. Even the shadows seemed to tighten around the altar. Will and June stepped forward. Their bodies convulsed first. A shudder ran up Will's spine, and he dropped to his knees with a guttural groan, not of pain, but surrender. June's fingernails dug into the dirt floor as her back arched unnaturally, her breath turning into sharp, animalistic grunts. I watched in terror as coarse black hair sprouted along Will's arms, shoulders, jaw. June's eyes shifted first brown, then gold. Then, an unholy yellow that glowed like the forest at night. Their limbs thickened, bones cracking beneath their skin, like dry branches snapping underfoot. They weren't screaming. They weren't frightened. They were becoming something they already knew they were. Father rumbled a chant in a language made of stone and winter and hunger. Each word made my skin crawl, like my blood was trying to respond in a tongue I didn't understand, but somewhere deep inside recognized. And then it struck me. This wasn't a transformation. It was awakening. Mother had always told us, the woods protect us, if we follow the rules. But that had always been a lie. A comfort. A lullaby, for the only child she feared might stay human. I felt the truth hit me like cold water down my spine. We weren't just an isolated family. We were a bloodline, an old one. One whispered about in northern tribes. One blamed for disappearances, for cold hunger, for long winters and missing hunters. Wendigo blood. Not fully human. Not fully monster. Something in between, something cursed to hunger, to devour, to survive in ways no human should. Mother had been the last thread of humanity holding us together. And now, with her gone, Father had to return her to the lineage. To the forest. To the ritual. The devouring rite. Will's jaw cracked wider. June's fingers elongated, tips sharpening. They were no longer resisting the drums, they were embracing them. Their eyes gleamed with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. I stepped back, heart pounding. "No," I whispered. "No, this can't be real." But Father heard me. He turned, lifting his half-human, half-beast face toward mine. His yellow eyes locked onto me, not angry, not disappointed. Expectant. He spoke a single word. "Choose." The resin flames around Mother's body pulsed brighter, revealing knives laid around the stone circle. Ritual blades. Old, bone-handled, blackened by age. Will reached for one without hesitation. June's lips curled into a feral smile as she took another. They looked euphoric. Father placed a third knife at my feet. And then I understood the final horror. To return Mother to the bloodline, they had to consume her. Her flesh, her spirit, her strength absorbed by her children. A cycle older than any scripture, any church, any civilization. A family tradition built on hunger so ancient, it had no beginning. Will lifted his blade. June's tongue tasted the resin-filled air. The drums thundered toward the peak of the ritual. I couldn't move. My stomach churned. My lungs squeezed tight. The heat from the blue flame blurred my vision. Something inside me, something buried, something instinctual pulled me forward, whispered for me to kneel, to take the blade, to take part, to become what my blood wanted. But another part of me, small, fragile, human, whispered back, "Run." Will's voice, now more growl than speech, echoed across the room. "Brother, join us." June's eyes glowed unbearably bright. "It's who we are." Father pointed to the knife again. "Choose." My heart cracked open with one brutal truth. This night would decide what I became. A son of the Wendigo, bound to hunger forever, a traitor to my bloodline, fleeing into a world I did not belong to. And there, between the altar and the forest drums, I realized either choice would break me. I don't remember deciding to run. One moment Father's monstrous eyes were fixed on me above the altar, waiting for my choice, and the next my body moved on its own. Some instinct older than blood, older than curses, took over. My legs carried me backward, then turned, then sprinted toward the pantry door before my mind could catch up. Behind me, Will roared, no longer a human sound, but something wild and furious. June hissed a guttural note that vibrated in my bones. Father's growl rolled through the room, like thunder trying to take shape. I shoved through the doorway, and stumbled into the cabin hall. My hand slammed against the wall, searching blindly for balance, then for the doorknob. The storm winds nearly tore the front door from its hinges when I threw it open. And then I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. The snow bit at my face, the freezing air scraped my throat raw, but I didn't stop. My boots dug into the mud and slush as I sprinted past the shed, past the woodpile, toward the old truck Father rarely let us use. Behind the cabin, a howl split the night. Not a wolf, not a bear, a Wendigo's call, long, hunting, summoning. I lunged into the truck, turned the key with shaking hands, and prayed the engine hadn't frozen. For a moment, nothing happened, just the rasping churn of something old and dying. Then, with a coughing belch of black smoke, the engine caught. I slammed my foot onto the gas. The tires spun against the ice, then lurched forward, spraying mud behind me. As the truck roared down the narrow mountain road, the drums rose again from deep, within Blackwater Pines, louder, angrier, beating in perfect rhythm with my heart. Every few seconds, I caught something in the rearview mirror. A tall, dark shape bursting across the tree line. Something running on 2 legs, then 4, then 2 again. The storm clouds flashed, and for a split instant I saw, Will galloping through the snow like a monstrous silhouette, June leaping through branches with inhuman grace. They were hunting me. I pushed the accelerator harder. The trees blurred into streaks of black. The truck bounced violently over potholes and half-frozen ruts, metal rattling hard enough. I thought the whole chassis would rip apart. I kept one hand white-knuckled on the wheel and the other pressed to my pounding chest. The drums grew softer as I put miles between us, but they never fully stopped. Not once. A few miles beyond the cabin, the trees thinned and revealed something I'd never expected: houses. Dozens of them. Dark. Empty. Windows broken. Doors hanging open. Snow untouched except for old boot tracks and drag marks. Blackwater Pines had once been a logging town. Mother used to tell us it was abandoned decades ago. Too remote, too dangerous, not enough work. But now, looking at the hollow, silent houses, the truth spread through me like ice. My family had been hunting here for decades. And the town hadn't been abandoned. It had been emptied. I sped through the ghost streets with a sickness rising in my stomach. Every house felt like a grave. Every dark window felt like an accusation. I finally reached the main road, a long stretch of asphalt barely plowed, running straight out of the mountains. For the first time I saw lights ahead. Civilization. A gas station. A cop car parked beside it. I pulled in too fast and skidded sideways. The officer got out, hand hovering over his holster. "Sir, you all right? What happened?" My hands shook so violently, I couldn't hold the steering wheel anymore. My mother," I gasped. She passed away tonight." The words spilled out before I could think of anything else. A true sentence hiding a monstrous truth behind it. The officer softened. "Okay. Breathe. Start over. You need medical help. Family? Someone we can call?" "Someone we can call." I nearly laughed, or screamed. "No," I whispered. "I just need to get away from there." He nodded slowly, gently, as if I were a drowning man clinging to a broken piece of wood. He told me to park the truck and come inside the station to warm up. He asked nothing about the forest. Nothing about the drums. Nothing about the stained mud on my clothes. I stayed there for hours, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of burnt coffee, staring blankly at the linoleum floor. But that night, lying alone in a thin motel bed by the interstate, I heard something through the window. A faint drumbeat. Slow, rhythmic, coming from the mountains. They knew. They knew I'd broken the rite, They knew I'd run. They knew I wasn't one of them. Not anymore. And the drums were telling me the truth I'd been running from. Since the moment I stepped out of the pantry, you can escape the woods. You can escape the mountain. But you cannot escape your blood. I've spent the last 40 years trying to pretend I'm not who I am. But blood has a way of finding you, even when memory fades and names change. Since the night I fled Blackwater Pines, I haven't stayed in one place long enough to grow roots. I change states every few months. Pick up odd jobs that pay under the table. Keep to myself. Avoid deep woods the way most people avoid graveyards. On paper I don't exist. In real life I barely do either. But the past hasn't loosened its grip. If anything, it's gotten closer. Over the decades, I've learned to recognize the signs missing campers, whose tracks simply vanish. Hunters found with torsos opened like game animals. Cabins shredded from the inside, livestock torn apart with no pattern. No mercy, no reason except hunger. Each time I read about it in some tiny local paper or online forum, a cold reality settles in my bones. My family is still alive. And they're still feeding. In 1998, a ranger in western Montana reported seeing something massive, upright, and covered in dark fur crossing a river at dawn. Search teams found nothing, but the description was too familiar, too exact, for me to dismiss. In 2007, a pair of college students hiking near Glacier vanished after leaving their camp to investigate drums in the distance. The rescue team later found their tent slashed open from the inside and the surrounding trees clawed deep too high for any bear. Those reports haunted me, but nothing shook me the way the 2015 footage did. A Bigfoot Hunter channel uploaded night vision video from outside Kalispell. A tall, lithe figure crouching behind a fallen log, eyes glowing like coals. The hair on the back of its neck was braided the same way. June used to braid hers before chores. I watched that clip until my vision blurred. The slope of the shoulders, the sharpness of the jaw, the way she tilted her head, none of it belonged to an animal. That was her. My little sister. Wendigo blood fully awakened. And if June survived the rite, then Will did too. And Father, whatever he truly was, still leads them. The last few years, I've started hearing it again. Not loud, not near, but far off like a heartbeat carried on cold wind. A low, slow thump. A drum calling across miles. Some nights I lie awake in cheap motel rooms, lights off, curtains drawn, and I swear the floor vibrates beneath me. Like the earth remembers what I tried so hard to forget. I'm old now. 66 and tired. My hands shake the way Mother's did near the end. I can feel something in my blood pulling toward home, toward the pines. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's the curse trying to finish what it started. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. But before the drums get close enough for me to hear clearly, I need someone else to understand the truth. Wendigo aren't myths. They're not spirits. They're not frozen monsters waiting in the snow. They're families. Old families. Who pass down hunger the way others pass down heirlooms. We were one of them. I was meant to be one of them. If you ever camp in Montana and hear drums echoing through the trees, don't convince yourself it's wind or water or some distant party. Don't go outside. Don't investigate. Don't shine a flashlight into the woods. Because those drums aren't calling the animals. They're calling the blood. They're calling the children home. And God help you if you have any of that blood in you.